Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Jafari. Today we're going to talk about conditionals and comparisons. Once again, this is from a book, AP Computer Science Done Right, and it's available on Amazon as an EPUB or a hardcover version. Um, I am joined by Irfan, who is going to talk about what we learned in the last section. Irfan, are you ready?
Yes, let's go. How's it going,
It's
first of all?
it's going really well. We had quite a bit of a break, but it's been going really well. Do you remember what we learned in the last section?
Yeah, sure. In the last session, 3.2, we learned about the methods that returns objects. We learned how to represent has a relationships between classes.
Okay, methods that return objects. Um, do you remember an example from a method that returns an object?
I think we did an example on BMI. Um, it's about height and weight and this kind of stuff. And we, because of the problem that would exist if we don't have a certain unit of measurement between feet and meters, for example, we used two different classes and then we connected them to each other. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we had a method that returned a height object essentially. So the feet and inches were an object, and height was an object itself that could be converted to centimeters or um, feet and inches essentially. All right, excellent. So today we're going to learn about comparisons. The keywords that we're going to learn today are if, else if, and of course, booleans by nature. Are you ready?
Yep, let's go.
Excellent. All right. So let's say you have a friend. Give me their name.
Matty.
Matin. All right. So Matin is a healthy individual. So he's a patient. And he is relatively healthy. He exercises, he drinks water, he does all the things that a young person needs to do. Um, Dr. Sarah, who is Matin's doctor, wants to represent the fact that Matin is a healthy individual. And in fact, she wants to represent that in the person class. Do you remember the person class?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so if you recall, we had some information in the person class, like their name, weights, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So we also want to represent that Matin is healthy. Um, Now, how would you represent this from before? Like, how would we say, if we wanted to add another field to the person class, what type would you use to represent healthy?
I think we would use a string, healthy or unhealthy, for example.
Yeah, so if we had a string and it could be set to either like healthy, like true or false, I guess. Um, so the thing that we need to remember is that strings are not a good representation of information. So in reality, we just want some kind of a flag that just says true or false. And for flags, or I guess switches, if you think of it, we call them booleans. Okay?
Okay, makes sense.
So booleans can only have two values. They can only either be true or false. So for example, if you want to evaluate 1 is less than 5, it would evaluate to true, right?
Yeah.
But if you evaluate 4 is greater than 8, it will evaluate to
False.
false, precisely. So it's like a very helpful thing to have in computer science and in terms of representing data. So in this case, we kind of want to have a boolean that just returns true or false based on whether or not a person is healthy, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and change. Let's go ahead and change our person class. So if you remember, we had class person. They had string name, a bunch of things, and then we're gonna change it to boolean. Remember, boolean is a small b because it's a type of something, just like int and double. It needs to be a small. Yeah, exactly. Boolean healthy. And what makes good programmers different from mediocre programmers?
The comments.
Exactly. So we'll add a comment. So the comment here, it can be something as useless as like is this person healthy, but that kind of already tells us, the naming already tells us this information. But we can say something like what we mean by healthy, like do you remember BMIs that we worked on?
Yes, I think between 22 and 25 used to be healthy. I'm not pretty sure though.
Yeah, so our comment can actually be even a little bit more generic. We can just say healthy BMI.
Okay.
Healthy BMI. Something like this. And then what else do we need to change?
We also need to change. I don't know. What do we need to change?
The constructor, right? As soon as we add a new field, we should also change the constructor of the class.
Okay, makes sense.
So we had person taken string name and a bunch of other things. Now it should also take boolean healthy.
Makes sense.
And we're just gonna do the constructor as this dot healthy gets healthy. That's all.
Okay.
All right, so that's the code for this part. Let's say in the person class, we now need to return a method that checks if the person is healthy. The method needs to start with a signature. So what should its signature be? What's its input and output?
What is the question again?
So we want to have a way to check whether or not this person is healthy. So remember how before, for example, if we wanted to check like the person's name, we just had, this person's
Yeah, I
name.
do. So for this one, we need to, first design a method, and then to call it, we use the keyword return if they're healthy or not.
Yes, exactly. So if you remember designing the method, we have 5 steps. The first step is the signature, which is the input and output.
I think the first step is purpose question. The second question is the signature.
Very good, very good. What's the purpose statement?
Whether or not they're healthy.
Yes, so it returns true. I actually think the first step was signature though, but it's okay. They're both important initially. So it can be true if a person is healthy. False otherwise. All right, what's the signature?
The signature is going to be a string, but now that we learned about the booleans, I think it's going to be a boolean.
Okay, so the input is going to be what, and the output is going to be what?
The output is going to be true or false.
So the output is going to be a boolean. And then we add the name of the method, which is healthy. And the input, what is it going to be?
The BMI, this.bmi, I think.
So remember, this method is being done inside the person class. So we have the person class's information, right? Including the healthy boolean. So we actually don't need to take in any input because we have access to all the, this fields.
Yeah, I understand.
Right? So right now we can just say return this dot healthy. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, totally.
Okay. So this is currently just the first step, but given that we're making this person class for Dr. Sarah, she needs to take the actual BMI. She can't just take a random guess of like, oh yeah, Mateen looks healthy, Irfan looks healthy, Alex is not healthy. She needs to take a look at the BMI. So we said the BMI is the person's weight divided by their height in meters, multiplied by itself, squared, right?
Right.
So, for example, let's say Roderick is 80 kilograms and 182 centimeters tall. Let's calculate Roderick's BMI. So it would be
80 divided by 1.82 squared.
Yes, exactly. So we divide this by 100 since it's going to be in meters. For those of us in the US, 100 centimeters are in 1 meters. So 182 centimeters means 1.82 meters. And we're going to multiply it by itself. This is Roderick's BMI. It approximates to 24.157. So essentially 24. So the way that BMI works in terms of healthy versus unhealthy, a BMI of less than 18.5, I believe, is considered underweight. A BMI of over 25 is considered overweight. Anything in between these two is considered healthy. And I believe over 30 is considered like obesity, essentially. 25 to 30. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. So now let's develop this method such that we can calculate the person's BMI and then check whether or not they're healthy. So I think we actually already have the calculation BMI in a different method from before, right?
Yes, I think so.
Right. So let's say that we already have the person BMI. calculated already.
Okay.
All right. Let's write some code. We would say if person BMI is strictly less than 18.5. Oh, I don't know why I have two parentheses. Then return the string underweight. I have a question for you, Irfan.
What is it?
If the person BMI is exactly 18.5, what would this evaluate to?
It will give us an error, I think, because it's less than 18.5. It will not return anything.
It wouldn't return an error. It would just evaluate to false. So remember, the way booleans work is we start. Let me do this real quick. We start with a conditional. So we say if, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a logic branch, which is a boolean. If the boolean is true, then it will evaluate whatever is here. So if true. If it's false, it goes into the next line. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, it makes sense.
So let's check with different numbers. So if the person BMI was 1, it says, okay, if 1 is less than 18.5, what does that evaluate to?
It is less than 18.5, so it's true.
Exactly. So it would be true. Then it says, okay, then return underweight. And when a method reaches the return statement, it is done with that method. It doesn't evaluate anything else because you're saying essentially return. You're saying that's it. You're done. Just give me the final result. Okay? So it wouldn't evaluate anything that we have right underneath it. If the person BMI was, let's say, 20, it would say
It's false.
yes, exactly. It would say it's false because 20 is not less than 18.5. So then it would go into the next branch and it would evaluate whatever it is here. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, great. So then we say, then we want to check if the person is healthy. So let's go back to blue. Or actually, let's do the black. Okay. Then when we have a second one, we would say if person BMI is less than 25. Right?
Yeah.
So at this point, we know the BMI is definitely at least 18.5. You can't be like 1 and reach here. Because if it was less than 18.5, the method would have returned already.
That is right, yeah.
So at this point, we know the person has to be what type of a body weight?
Overweight.
It's healthy, right? 18.5 to 25 is healthy.
Oh, less than 25, yeah, it's healthy.
Yeah. So at this point, we know the person is definitely more than 25. So then we make another branch saying if person BMI less than 30, then we want to return. So how much is their BMI right now?
It's more than 25 and less than 30.
Exactly. And that is considered overweight. And then lastly, if they are greater or equal to 25, I mean 30, sorry, you want to return obese. Right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. So if you write this, let's say you have this as, let's say this is inside a method called body weight type, and it would be something like this: public body weight type. Oh, actually, it would need to be. What's its signature?
It's person BMI.
Signature, not purpose statement.
Oh, it's if.
The signature is input and output. So what is the input type of this method?
It's a boolean. No, the output is a boolean. What is the input?
So the input is just the person, so we don't need anything, so it's nothing. What's the output?
It's gonna be a boolean, right?
Take a look at this return statement. Are we returning a boolean?
No.
Okay.
We're returning underweight.
Which is of type?
A string.
Yes, exactly. So this method is returning a string body type, and it doesn't need to take in anything. Yeah. So right now, you're telling Java, hey, I am definitely going to give you a string as my return type, right?
Yeah.
So let me just make some room here. Okay. So Java right now will actually be upset and won't be able to, will give you an error because it's saying there's a possibility that all these if branches are false, and then when I reach at the end, I can't return something. You haven't told me what to return. Java's not able to check the logic and say, well, if it's a number, it's definitely going to fall into at least the last one because all the way here you've checked until 30, and this one, like, it's not going to check the logic, right?
Yeah.
So instead of all these if statements, we use else if. So the first one needs to be an if. So the first one starts with an if because you're saying, okay, this is the first thing that I'm asking you. And then you're saying, if this first thing didn't evaluate to true, because right now it would evaluate every single one of them. But you're saying, if the first thing didn't evaluate to true, then do this other things. So then you would check to see else if. else if.
I don't quite understand this part. Why would the computer do all the numbers? I mean, why would it go through all these methods?
That's a great question. Let me start it with something else. Let's say you're doing a completely different method, okay?
Okay.
And let's say you have a counter. So it's not a return statement, it's just a counter. And you set it at 0. Okay?
Okay.
Then you have the first statement, some evaluation, it doesn't matter. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then you want to say counter plus 1. Right? This is the equivalent of saying counter gets counter plus 1.
Okay.
Right? This just makes 0 to be 1. And that's it. And then you have if some other condition, then you want to say counter gets counter plus 2. Okay?
So now in this case, it makes sense because the computer doesn't know which one of these do we mean. But in that case, in the BMI case, there's a certain number, there's a single number, which is going to be obvious.
The single number meaning the person BMI?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Let's say the condition here is also person BMI. Let's say in here I'm checking person BMI to be less than 18. And then in here I'm going to check person BMI.
Oh, now I get it.
To be
now I get it.
Less than 25, let's say. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the else if part, right? Like the PMI is only going to be one number, right? So it's only going to be true for one of these branches. It can be true for both. Well, actually, it can't be true for both right now because it can be both less than 18 and less than 25. Right?
Now I get it, yeah.
So if it's 15, the counter is going to get 1, and then it's going to get 3, right? The difference here is a few things. Well, first of all, this method also would return an error because it says, let's say the counter was 27. None of these would have been returned to true, right?
So, yeah, because we don't have that condition.
Yeah. So then it doesn't know what to return. So you need the last branch. So like this. This needs to be else. Just else. And what it means is, hey, if the person's BMI is less than 18, do this. Otherwise, if it's less than 25, do this other thing. Otherwise, if it's less than 30, do this other thing. Otherwise, no other condition, return obese. Logically, we can follow and say, okay, well, this else is going to be the same as checking for it to be greater or equal to 30. But then Java is able to say, okay, you have this default branch that if none of these other conditions are met, you are going to return something. So I'm happy. Does that make sense?
Now I get it. Yes, it makes sense.
Perfect.
So we can have as many else ifs as we want. It doesn't matter. But for else and for if, there's just one of them.
For else, it is one of them. right? Because that's your
Okay.
default branch. The if, it depends. In this scenario, we should only have one if because that's our first starting point. But it's possible that you want to check, I don't know, the person's BMI. If it's 18.5, then you also want to check their name starts with the letter A.
Oh,
The
okay.
if and else if are kind of like a logic branch, and as we start using them, you might learn when we would use if or else if. But just think of it as when you were speaking in English, are you saying the first conditional and then the second conditional is dependent on the first conditional? Then you would say else if. So, for example, I would tell you, hey, I want to go on a run with you tomorrow morning. If not, if you can't go on a run tomorrow morning, I would like to go on a swim if you have like a swimming pool, right? So
Okay.
in this case, I would use else if because the swimming is dependent on whether or not we go running.
Sure. Now
Right?
makes sense.
Yeah. But if the situation doesn't matter, if I'm saying, hey, if you are awake tomorrow morning, I'd like to go on a run with you. And then also, if you have money, I would like to go get coffee.
It's two ifs, and it doesn't matter.
Exactly, because they're not dependent on each other.
Okay. Now I get it.
Excellent. So now we're at our favorite part, which is homework.
Let's do them.
Yay. Okay, so the person class has a breakfast, lunch, and dinner fields. Okay?
Okay.
30.1. Shrek is getting worried about his weight. Have you seen Shrek?
Of course.
Okay,
That's
good.
my favorite.
Excellent. I was going to say you should watch Shrek as part of the homework if you want. I might watch Shrek. So he wants to watch his weight and learns to watch his calorie intake, essentially. His doctor suggests if he consumes more than 40,000 calories, 4,000, not 40,000, that's insane. 4,000 calories a day, he will gain more weight. Okay?
Okay.
The donkey gets inspired and he is concerned that if Shrek eats less than 2,000 calories a day, he will lose too much weight and Fiona will lose interest.
Okay.
Yeah. So we want to add a class to the person. We want to add a method to the person class and warn Shrek if he's had too much to eat or too little food. Okay?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Great. Shrek thanks you. Then the second problem is now that Shrek is too much preoccupied with his diet and has forgotten about his kids' schoolwork. He wants to be a more, attentive parent. And the kids bring a report card home with their percent grade. Shrek, however, only knows letter grades. So Shrek only understands like if you got an A or a B or a C. But the kids bring home a report card that says like 100, 90, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So Shrek is confused, and given that he is too preoccupied with his diet, he wants a method that converts the kid's percent point to letter grades. And it is up to you how you divide things up, but in general, 100 is an A, 90 is an A minus, I think 80 is a B minus, and so forth.
I think this one is going to be pretty interesting.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Irfan. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.